What's up, everyone? This is Deemer Class, and we're back with episode 4 of Class and Jules. I've got my man Jules Hendenberg here, and today we have special guests Matt Dunn and Matt McMahon. Matt Dunn, defenseman for the Whip Snakes Lacrosse Club, and Matt McMahon, defenseman for the Archers Lacrosse Club. We're extremely excited to have these two guys here, both all-star defenders and two of the best in the PLL. Matt and Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Steamer. Yeah, thanks.
These two guys joined First Class Lacrosse, this past year. Grew up playing with Matt Dunn. We played at Loyola Wakefield, played some rec ball before that, and then, got to know Matt through some mutual friends. So, fellas, really excited to have you on here. I know Jules and I are fired up to pick your guys' brain and talk a little bit about PLL, talk about the defensive position, and just kind of hang out and keep letting our audience get to know you guys.
So I'll say, I'll start with you, Matt. Obviously played on the Whip Snakes defense. I know, Maryland guy. Talk a little bit about, what it's taken to kind of get to this level and how things have kind of shaken out for you. Kind of coming together with all those Maryland guys. It's definitely a unique situation. I think everyone's kind of noticing that chemistry and kind of how that's playing out and helping you guys really position yourselves to take it this tournament.
Yeah. Thanks, Jules. It's been a really cool experience kind of getting the opportunity to play with a bunch of guys you played with in college and get back together like this, something I never saw happening, and I don't think any of us saw happening after you graduate. It's also been really cool just for me, I was kind of in the middle of a lot of these guys. So, Tim Muller is a year below me, Bryce Young's a year below me, and Mike Earhart's 2 years ahead of me. So I kind of had a lot of them on both ends. But some of the guys, Jeremy Sieverts, I never got to play with in my time. So I'm getting to play with Alumni also. So all of that has just been a really cool experience, getting to kind of play with a bunch of Maryland guys that have gone through the program at different times and got different experiences and have different stories. So that's been a really cool dynamic. I think as far as getting to this point, it's just, fortunate enough to kind of have good coaching throughout my career and, play with Deemer growing up at Loyola Wakefield, had good coaches at those points. And fortunately, the opportunities led me to have a chance to play at Maryland that I really enjoyed. And then playing there, I think that program, that culture has kind of instilled principles in guys that have allowed them to be successful in the game, but also kind of off the field. And so you see that with a lot of the guys on our team, a lot of like-minded players that continue to keep that culture. And at the end of the day, it's just really enjoyable playing with a team you like being around. I think that's what our guys have found.
Definitely. I appreciate that. And I'll kind of circle back to some of that culture stuff and what that's really been able to do for you guys, kind of just watching and really just the margin of error on defense is so slim. I think it really makes it tough for us on the offensive side. And I'll kind of refer back to that. But, Matt, talk a little bit about, kind of your journey and getting to the PLL. I know obviously you're a New Jersey guy. And I feel like for you, I feel like both of us kind of coming out of New Jersey, similar instances of more of an underdog kind of player. I know you went to Penn and you kind of take pride in that program and kind of what you guys built kind of leading up to 2019, 2020 with that Penn program. And now, coming to the pro scene, for me, I wasn't super familiar with you until I really started to go against you. And then I quickly realized you're definitely one of the best in the league and obviously showcasing that season, which is pretty exciting for us to watch. And as far as FCL goes, and then just as far as you, I know it's big for you with the offseason that you had with training.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jules. And I think you're kind of spot on coming out of New Jersey. I know you had a similar background where it was the level of talent wasn't necessarily kind of on the same scale as Baltimore and Long Island and some of the other hotbeds. So getting to put yourself up to a measuring stick and figure out how good you were. You didn't have that many opportunities. So even getting to Penn, it was kind of a similar thing. The Ivy League wasn't necessarily where it is now. And so you're not necessarily covering first team All-Americans every game like you would in the Big Ten or the ACC back then. And so for me, it was always kind of finding out what my true potential was and really iron sharpening iron. I think Matt will probably agree, but the better competition that you play against defensively really makes you a better defensive player game after game. And so getting to the professional level, I really felt I was just kind of reaching my stage of development to the point where I could really play at a high level and play alongside some of the best guys. So it was a little bit of a confidence thing for a while in high school and in college, like really trying to see where I measured up. And then getting to the professional level, it's been like an extended period of time where you get to continue learning about the game. And on the defensive side of the ball, I think Matt, again, will probably agree. It's just like learning more and more about what the fundamentals are and what are the important things that you need to know as a defenseman is just going to make you better and better. So I think just really like finally getting to play against some of the best guys has been helpful in just like building my own confidence over time.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to hear you touch on that. And kind of before we dig into, what you guys are going through now and your progression, talk a little bit about like your development in high school. I know, Matt and Matt, both multi-sport guys, both having awesome coaches. Talk about how, for some of our young defenders that are listening, what were some things that were pivotal in your development? I think both of you guys, developing into really, big, strong defensemen that also have, really high IQ for the game. How has your guys' development been over the years? And, what are some things that young defenders can, try and take away?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I've thought about this before at different times. And you mentioned the multi-sport thing, and I do think that was a big thing for me. Lacrosse wasn't probably one of my favorite sports until about ninth grade or so, and so growing up, I was always playing just like pickup sports all the time, so tried a little bit of everything. But I played football and basketball competitively, and ended up playing basketball all the way through high school. And just the skill set you develop in sports like that, just transfer over to a sport like lacrosse. I honestly think playing basketball was huge for playing defense in lacrosse. There's so many things that carry over from footwork to game flow to defensive tactics and strategies and game IQ. If you think about basketball, right, you're defending somebody from getting to a point in the basket, and you're trying to force them the spots that are tough shots, right? It's the same thing in lacrosse, right? There's a goal, there's a basket, you try to force guys to a certain spot. So you work on your angle play, you learn what guys' tendencies are. So in basketball, you know what guy likes to cross which way or shoot which hand, or, feels more comfortable doing what. You try to force them to do the opposite. And it's the same thing in lacrosse. You see a guy, you pick up on their tendencies, and you try to figure out. A lot of lacrosse is, forcing guys to tough areas, but some areas are tougher for certain guys than others, right? So you figure out what certain guys want to do, and you try to take away those spots, whether it's a right-handed player wants to go to the right, you take that away. Or some guys are better shooting up the hash or shooting question marks. You kind of learn their tendencies and their moves and figure out that everybody has these certain things, and you take that away. And I think you develop that kind of athletic IQ through playing a bunch of different sports and years of doing it. But I do think a lot of my, ability was developed through playing other sports, because I didn't spend a ton of time when I was 10 or 12, like just focusing so much on lacrosse. It's important to have that skill component development and work on your fundamentals with it, catching and throwing, and your basics, understanding of footwork. But a lot of it's developed just through like getting out there and playing.
Yeah, I agree completely with Matt. Like, I think it was kind of a disadvantage in some areas. Having played 3 sports in high school, you don't have the opportunity to really like spend a lot of time lifting weights, getting stronger, working on your stick. But there's just so much that you can take away from playing basketball in particular. Like Matt touched on a lot of the on-ball stuff, but like the off-ball stuff is just so similar to the sport of lacrosse, with like rotations helping out on the backside, pick play. Like it's so similar, and it's just so many repetitions one after another. And I think that's why you see a lot of kids getting a lot out of playing box, because it's just like, it's like field lacrosse, but it has all of these kind of bottled up situations, like a pick and roll or a backside help, like a 3-on-2. It just has them in like crazy high numbers for the same time of a game. So it's just like accelerates your development of understanding different offensive schemes and how you defend those a lot faster. And then I think playing football too is just good for developing a little physicality. Like I think playing defense in our sport it's important to have that kind of like mean component where if somebody comes through the middle, like you're ready to lower a shoulder and deliver a blow. And I always thought that like football kind of helped build that base level for like a lot of defensive players at the college level. So I agree with Matt. I think there's a lot of good stuff that young players can do in terms of individual improvement in the off season, but I don't think any of them really surmount playing other sports and just trying to get those repetitions, playing help defense, stuff like that.
Cool. I appreciate you guys kind of diving into that. And, with that being said, I kind of want to talk a little bit more specifically, about how you guys have been playing, how you've been handling, the matchups. I know obviously it's been game after game, and that's a little bit different, than kind of the timing you have to really develop over a week to play out. So kind of going into playoffs, what are you guys thinking as far as, and I'll start with you, Matt McMahon. I've noticed sometimes I feel like right now you're the guy that's covering the ball carrier more so, and then sometimes maybe you're covering the number 2 guy. How do you guys really determine, for this game going in, if you're going to really cover Rob or Brownie? And what's that like to kind of be, on the edge, or do you kind of figure that out sooner? And how do you prepare for that with such short time?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing to start with, and it'll be interesting to hear Matt's point of view, see how we differ just in kind of approaching the same problem. But I've always kind of looked at it, especially at the professional level where you're like really familiar with these teams. You look at it by like a unit basis. So like, what does this attack unit bring to the table? The Atlas attack, for example, like you have Rob, who's a really dynamic ball carrier. He's a scorer. He's a distributor. He kind of does it all. You have Eric Law, who's more of like an in-between guy. He can carry the ball. He can work off ball. He kind of fits whatever need they have in each possession. And then you have Brownie, who's like just a lights out shooter, moves really well off ball. And it's just like a nightmare away from the ball to keep track of. And so just trying to figure out like how each of our defensive players can best match up. I think the first thing that we look at is like from a physicality component. So like, who is our guy that best matches the ball carrier, and just try to get a 3-and-3 pairing that matches up best where we don't have an athletic mismatch. And that kind of is like our starting point. And then the second would be like skill set. So, we have Eli Gobrecht, who's very good on ball. We have Curtis Corley, who's extremely good off ball. We tend to put those guys, more accordingly to what the offensive players are looking to do. And then the last thing is really just finding out like which is the best. The prioritization of each of these it can kind of differ game to game, but like stick-handedness, like, so if you have a righty ball carrier, you want to put a lefty defender on him so that he's got to go through your stick to get to their strong hand, and vice versa for a lefty dodger. You want to put a righty on him so that he's got to go stick on stick. So that's kind of like the priority scale there, like athleticism, skill set, and then your defenseman's stick-handedness relative to theirs. So that's kind of like our approach to that, but would be interesting to hear Dunn's point of view on that.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to look at it, and I think all those factors come into play. I guess we're a little spoiled in the fact that Tim, Bryce, and I having played together for so long, and like kind of each of us at our time at Maryland kind of honestly, we all spent times like our progressions were all like a little bit similar at Maryland. So we saw it there. Like I kind of started off as an off-ball defender because when I came in, like we had Gordon Murray starting as our own ball cover guy, and Casey Ikeda playing also. And then, as we transitioned forward and Gordon moved on, and then I kind of filled into the role as a cover guy. That was really at that time, like a little bit of a question mark, and kind of was able to do that. And then as, I graduated, Tim kind of filled into that role the year below me, and then Bryce did it the year below him. But before all those times, we all kind of played an off-ball role before we became the cover guy, and not necessarily saying that the cover guy is better than the off-ball guy, because as you'll see in the league right now, having 3 guys that can cover the ball well but can't play well together off-ball just doesn't work. It's the same as having 3 guys on attack that can dodge well, but can't move well off the ball well. Just doesn't work. You know, in the game of lacrosse, there's 1 ball and there's 6 players on the side of the field total. So if somehow the math comes out that, like, you know, 80 whatever percent of the time you don't have the ball on your stick, or there's an 83% chance you don't have the ball on your stick if the ball is shared equally. Also means there's that same percentage chance you're not playing the ball when you're on defense, that you're actually off the ball. So there's a lot of value to being able to play on the ball and off the ball. And I think with Tim, Bryce, and I, we've all had experience doing both. I think the way we look at matchups now is similar to how Matt kind of said it. We all kind of have like similar skill sets. And we also look at it like, look, sometimes a guy's a little banged up. So a guy's a little banged up, be like, hey, we might put you at a guy that's probably not going to run you as much that game. Or we'll look at just like, hey, you know, Bryce is our lefty. So Matt talked about handedness there. Bryce is our lefty. Weirdly enough, Bryce actually likes covering left-handed players because he plays with a little bit of that cross-hand V-hold and is pretty good at it. But, you know, it also helps him to have that stick on the left side because, you know, for me, I prefer covering lefties if I have the chance because I feel like my stick is always in a good spot for a guy coming back to his left. So I prefer to cover a lefty. We all, you know, do a little bit of both. The way we typically look at matchups is just like, hey, if we're going to put, you know, we look at the type of attackman. So is it a quick guy? Is it a big, stronger guy? What is that attackman's role for that team? Like Matt said, is this an offense that runs through that attack? And if this one guy gets the ball, is he going to the goal or is he a feeder? If he's going to the goal and he's not a huge feeding threat, we might put one guy on the ball and say, okay, let's be willing to support this guy a little more. We'll have him play the ball hard and we'll all be willing to help a little bit. If that guy is primarily a feeder, we want to see which of us we feel comfortable putting on an island and saying, hey, when this guy gets the ball, if he wants to score 2 or 3 unassisted goals this game, so be it. That's that. Hopefully he doesn't, but if that's that, we can't have this guy go 2 and 6 though. So I think we kind of look at like the strengths of the offensive player, and then we look at our individual strengths and kind of get comfortable with like, hey, some of it also, and at this point, this isn't for, you know, everybody, but at this point in our careers, like, hey, have you covered this guy before? How'd you do against him last time? And sometimes like I've covered a guy 6 times before and I've done well against him. Maybe Bryce has covered a guy 3 times before and did well against him, or Tim covered a guy in college. Be like, hey, you want to cover him? Okay, go ahead. And I think that's been helpful with us is that we try to find Coach Staggs and Murphy do a good job of like picking the matchups, but they're also open to like us being like, hey, we think this might actually work better, and they're pretty good with that. So very similar things to Matt there.
Yeah, so Matt, going off that real quick, and I wanted to touch on that with both of you guys. I think that stuff was extremely insightful. I think, you know, a big thing for offense players, defense players, anyone in the league, right? And, you know, Jules and I have spent time talking about ego, right? We've been, you know, digging in more and more to, you know, some mindfulness, and I've been learning from Jules. And, you know, you both kind of touched on it. You know, can you guys talk a little bit about, you know, obviously when you're, you know, a top cover guy and you've gotten to this point in your careers, you know, you want the big matchup, you know, you want to own that matchup, you know, maybe you want to hold that guy to 0 points, right? You know, and talk a little bit about how, you know, you guys are able, you know, especially like you said, Matt, with 3 guys, you know, that have all been the number 1 cover guy. You know, Matt, you've talked about with, you know, you and Eli, both guys good covering on ball. How do you guys, you know, put that aside and be open to that with each other and work to find those matchups?
Yeah, I think this is like kind of cuts to the core of like what Matt and I both believe is kind of like the core principle of like playing defense. Matt already touched on it a little bit, but we believe it's like percentages. So it's however you want to match up against the offense, however you want to play them. The ultimate goal is to give them the worst percentage shots that they could possibly get, or the worst percentage looks offensively that they could get. And that's really the key to limiting goals, limiting shots, playing well as a unit. So like every time these conversations come up, I think it's like, if you're dealing with somebody that's like really going to get hurt by the fact that they wanted to match up on one person or versus the other, the real reason behind it is like they haven't bought into that belief where it's like, all right, as a defensive unit, we need to do whatever it takes to just limit their opportunities to be the worst possible opportunities that they can get versus our defense. So Once you kind of like put that ahead of individual accolades, like the post-game write-ups, like all that stuff, I think that's kind of like a crucial piece to being a really good defense. And so it's almost kind of like a table stakes for like being a good defense. Like if you have any element of like ego where you're like, I want to cover this guy, I want to be the cover guy, I want to be known to everybody as the number one, then you're kind of already missing the point. The point being like, you just got to give them the worst looks that they can have. And if you're doing anything else from that, then you're not being a good defensive player or a good teammate for your defensive unit.
Yeah, I actually couldn't agree more. And by the way, that it's challenging to do that. It's the same. Like, I think it's really obvious on offense, like what people chase, and it's like a guy that wants to score a lot or get a lot of points for themselves. It's a little more subtle defensively. And some people might say, the selfish defenseman is one that throws a lot of takeaway checks or goes over the head. Well, the selfish defenseman is also one that cares more about their matchup than their team success, and that can really plague a defense. And so, from the game plan phase to the like, hey, let's match up, and we think, Matt, today you're going to cover the off-ball player for X, Y, and Z, and it might be for really good reasons. Like, hey, we just think, it might be helpful to have you communicate inside. And sometimes that's the case. And if you have a strong off-ball skill set, maybe that's what your team needs you to do that game. But you're like, no, I want to be on the ball so everybody knows I was covering it. So getting over that part's crucial. Also, if you go into the game thinking, hey, I got to make sure my guy doesn't get a goal. So now when the ball's up top and the midi takes the middle of the field and I'm staring at my guy 3 yards behind GLE and I'm below GLE there and I can't help the rest of the defense, well, that hurts the defense. So although there's a certain like competitor's mindset to when you get a matchup and you're on the ball to like that mindset of like, hey, I'm going to win this type of thing. If you're thinking about that the whole game and not thinking about the ultimate goal, which is we want to give up the lowest percentage shots, like Matt said, the shots our goalie wants to see to limit their opportunities the most, which is the defense's goal, and to make it about your matchup, that's when you're kind of being selfish as a defenseman. And I guarantee you every defenseman at some point's been guilty of it. I know I have, but that's always a check I do with myself throughout games to be like, hey, I want to make sure my guys can score, but not at the expense of the team scoring. So make sure I'm not doing things like, trying to get through a pick at a tough time just because I want to stay on my guy, or like not filling up to the right spot or rotating right because I was too worried about my guy. Because it's not really about your guy. It's about kind of, matchups are more of a luxury, but defense itself is a team system.
And I think we're kind of making it out to be like this really easy thing, but it's incredibly difficult to like remove that aspect of it. Like, if you're trying to be one of the top defensive players in the world, then like you have like an ego about you and you want to cover the best guys and you want to shut them down and you want to have everybody in the world see that they put up 0-0 against you. But like, it's hard to swallow that. And I think that's something that like, you have to work on over time. And it's certainly something that didn't really come to me until my later stages of my college career, where it really, you were put into a leadership role in the defense and you started to think about like, all right, this is how our unit needs to operate. This isn't about me. It's about our matchup versus their six that they put out there. And so I just want to say it's difficult to do if you want to be one of the best players, but that's kind of like table stakes again. Like if you want to be a good defense, you got to get rid of that ego aspect.
It's like the concept of singles, right, Jules?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's interesting to hear you guys talk about it from the defensive side, because I think, like you said, Dunn, it's so much easier to kind of see it on the offensive side as like a fan as well, just watching the games. You can tell, who's really just trying to get theirs. But on the defensive side, for us, maybe I'm watching and someone like kind of holds that matchup a little bit, but then he's just screwing the rest of his offense and then they lose the game. But he's kind of getting that in the headlines. Oh, I held, that this player held Rambo to, just 2 goals that game. And it's just like, well, you held him to 2 goals, but by you doing that and focusing on him so much, well, now the rest of your team let in, 12 goals. And with that being said, like, Dunn, kind of this question for you. I think it's pretty apparent, as, spectators and in the PLL watching your defense right now, I think you guys are arguably one of the best, assembled defenses in the pro league. And obviously, talk about college, it's the best defensemen from Maryland that have kind of moved on. What do you think really separates you guys? And what's stuff that, like we talked about before, the younger guys, that if they're trying to look to emulate and kind of really follow in your guys' footsteps, what can 2 or 3 things that they can focus on as a defensive unit that allows you guys to have that such limited margin of error when you get their stops?
Yeah. And first, I want to caveat it with saying that, like, I gotta call a spade here and say defense is a lot easier to play when your face-off guy is dominant and your goalie's hot, because that's been the case for us. And you got to look at things objectively and say, like, I think we've been playing pretty good defense, but I think we've been helped by the fact that we've had a guy that's been getting our team the ball, which gives you 2 things. It gives you less time on defense, which also leaves you slightly more rested when the ball comes down. At the end of the day, the funny thing, you can have 2 very similar possessions and 2 very similar looks, and if the ball goes in the net and doesn't go in the net, they're 2 completely different things. So that's when having a good goalie comes into play. That turns like, good defense, Kyle saw the shot, I want to say, up and out, or, how'd you not slide that guy down the alley there? Like, so that's not the point of this here, but those are just things that I want to call out to those guys, and a lot of our success right now has been because of that. I do think though, our defense has done some things well and plays well together. We definitely have things to work on. I think a lot of it is kind of the egoless part, and we're not perfect there, but I think we've all bought into the fact that we trust each other. That it's hard to be egoless if you suspect another guy of not being so, right? If, like, on offense, if you're trying to be the guy that hits singles, but the guy you always hit the single to is going to take the dumb shot, then you're like, why am I hitting the single anymore? Yeah. Same thing on defense, right? If you're like, why? You're like, oh, I don't care about my matchup, but so-and-so is out to get theirs, like, it's going to plague that. I think we're fortunate in not having that. I really do. I think we've bought into that, and that stems from good leadership on our team and guys not wanting to buy into that. And so I think we have that. So that leads to a lot of trust in our defense, and trust is really huge. Yeah. At no point do we allow ourselves to kind of point fingers at each other and get on each other's backs when mistakes happen. And we figure out what happened, where we hold each other accountable. We're not like blaming each other, because at the end of the day, we do trust each other. That translates onto the field. I think we have good chemistry, and we have those relationships where we can chat about things like throughout the day, and we're all like really close outside of lacrosse. So, we talk about game plan, little adjustments. We all watch our film, and we come into the game very prepared. I think nobody's forced to be told to, like, hey, you have to go watch your film and come in like rolling their eyes. Like, everybody's doing their film on their own because it's stuff they really want to do. So I think, trust for defense is huge, but preparation is also really big. I think all of the guys on our close team, probably most of the guys on our team, were guys that, like, were never the guys that could roll out of bed, tie their shoes up and play. They got to where they got to because they had a really good work ethic and were obsessive about kind of preparing. And I don't know if that's something that was instilled in our guys in college or not, but it's kind of true throughout. And like that kind of the outside guys, TJ Camizio and Ty Warner, that aren't Maryland guys, are very similar. And they've been huge in our success. And then I think that the last part is just like our D middies are really good. And I can't overemphasize like how important it is to have that, because you can have, and Matt will, I'm sure, say the same thing, you can have 3 stud poles and a good LSM, but if you have 2 middies out there that A, can't cover the ball, but even more importantly, don't have any athletic, like, defensive IQ, and can't communicate or be receptive to hearing things on the field, you're playing 6-on-5, and that's really tough, or 6-on-4. So I think we're lucky, we have guys that trust each other, guys that prepare a lot, and then we're really lucky to have a strong defensive midfield core, which for a lot of teams is where, the breakdown occurs.
Yeah, and I know you Matt, you can go ahead, Matt, if you have a comment about that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, like, I mean, similar to what you were saying before, Jules, like, I enjoy watching watching the games and enjoy watching good defense. And so I watch Whipsnake's games, and like I admire their defensive group. And I think the two things that makes them such a good group is the chemistry, like Matt talked about, which I think is like essential for having an elite defensive group, because it allows you to make plays without having to like verbally communicate. Like I'm sure there's times on the field where Dunn is kind of assessing the situation, and he is seeing that a rotation is about to happen, and he knows that Bryce is going to leave his man to jump the next pass. And so he, without even having to hear it, is already kind of hedging towards Bryce's man. And so I always think that's what we did well at Penn. Like when you get a group that's like, you know, hanging out all the time, gets along really well, like you can begin to anticipate what your teammates are going to do and just move a little bit faster on defense. And I definitely see that with your group, Matt. And then the second thing is just like the culture. Like we've kind of highlighted a lot of points about it. But like you remove the ego, and then you really hammer home discipline. So like it's much easier to stop a team by just playing fundamental defense and throwing low risk checks, and like having 6 guys out there that are approaching the ball the right way, that are not taking any risks and are just kind of like waiting for the offense to make a mistake, versus like how many times out of 10 you're going to have your best guy go over the head and get the check. Like just having that discipline. So like that trust, like you guys were talking about, where every player in your unit is going to continue to hit singles, like that is essential for a really good defense, because then you're just stacking stops after stops, just waiting for the offense to make a mistake instead of handing them something. So the chemistry and then the culture to just be really disciplined and do the right thing is what I like to watch out of your guys' group. And I think it's what makes you guys so good.
That percentages comment, Matt, really hits home. You know, I think like, you know, we see it, you know, a guy could be in good position, and then, you know, maybe it's the ego, maybe it's, you know, the discipline going for a check, low percentage check, and then guy turns the corner, right? And if you can hold yourself to that standard, hold each other to that standard of accountability, that then takes the skill piece, ties it into the culture piece, you know. And I think, you know, both, you know, Coach Resch and Coach Stagnita and Coach Murphy, for you guys, you know, you guys are the ones in the locker rooms, but I think that's evident to me as a coach and everyone watching, you know, that your coaches have done such a great job in instilling that. And then obviously both coming from great college programs. I think the other point that I want to hit home, you know, for coaches and players listening is, you know, not to say that you guys weren't, you know, good athletes in high school, because obviously you were and kept getting better. But I think all of us in this, you know, podcast right now, all 4 of us have really prided ourselves on, you know, earning the things we've gotten in our careers, right? And really putting in the time. And so can you guys, you know, speak to that a little bit in terms of, you know, maybe you two weren't, you know, the most athletic always on the field to where you had to be disciplined. You had to approach with your stick out in front, because if you made those mistakes, you might pay for it more, you know, than another guy early on. And then because you had that discipline, as you guys have grown, worked on your footwork, gotten stronger, it's kind of led you to where you are when you don't forget those lessons.
Yeah. I think I was always hammered in. I guess I was hammered into me from my coaches, and thankfully it was, because if I was, you know, when you're younger, when you're a younger player trying to figure out the game, you don't revert to discipline. You revert to the fun, cool things you see. And if I tried to play that way, I would not have played at Maryland, and I would not have be playing right now. That's just a fact. I wasn't good enough. There's a couple players that were good enough and are good enough to go out and be athletic and do cool things and run next to guys and throw stick checks. That's not me. And if it was me, my level of play would be half of what it is now. And I don't think I would have gotten recruited to Maryland. If I did, I would not have played there. So our coaches always instilled that into me. And like, you know, to your point, Deemer, like when I got to Maryland, I wasn't, you know, on the radar to be a starter. I was kind of a late recruit. Not like the quickest feet, like kind of like not the best stick. But one thing I always prided myself in was being coachable. And so I spent a lot of time with our D coordinator and coaches, and they told me what to do to play. And so I was hyper focused on doing these little things that they told me to do. And that was, stick on front, jump rope, hit these footwork drills and do them all the time, allowing me to really instill like defensive fundamental principles in my game. And I saw that pay off throughout that time. And now I'm not going to say I was perfect. I had times throughout my career where I did check myself, and there was games where I played well for a year and was covering top guys, and maybe I thought I was a little better than I was, and maybe I tried to go and take the ball away from a couple of guys, and I quickly got reminded that wasn't my game. And it's funny. Yeah. And like, it's funny because I think the way I always thought of like these professional defenders, and when I was younger, these Division I big time defenders, was like, oh, these are guys that can go out and they're going to throw these sweet checks and strip these guys and all that. And so I was like, I always wanted to be one of those guys. And I quickly found out that like, if you put me on a good high school attacking right now, and I went and tried to take the ball away from him, I would get toasted. Like it just doesn't matter. Like I think if I play a fundamental defense, I can cover, some of the best guys in the world. But if I revert away from that, I am not a good player. And so I have to keep telling myself that. Even sometimes before games, I do like mental things from like, this guy's going to do a move like this. You might see a little stick, like, don't throw it. Like, don't throw it. Don't throw it. Like, just sit there on the hip. You're going to sit, like, just to make sure when you go through scenarios like that, because sometimes if you don't practice that stuff, your instinct might be to try to make a play. And,
like,
there's times where
dodgeball, grabbing the pizza.
Yeah, exactly like that. Well, not exactly like that. That's a little weirder. Not exactly like that, but similar. Discipline. Yeah, but, I mean, my point is that, I think the understanding what I think I was coached well enough to learn what makes a really good defender and what needs to be done. And then the discipline to adhere to that and develop the skills to get you able to do those things, to play your angles well and understand what they are and use your stick well, are really important. But, I think that foundation, understanding how to play great defense, is what enabled me to play at this level, not just a roll a ball and play type of style. So I owe it a lot to really good coaching, and people along the way that have shown me kind of like, we weren't allowed to throw over the head checks. We weren't allowed to throw one-handed wrap checks at Maryland. Like Jesse Bernhardt was a senior there in a Torchon finalist, and he didn't go over the head, and he was arguably, the best defender in the country. And arguably still one of the best in the world, and he doesn't do that stuff. And so just seeing guys like that, that were that good and not do that stuff, was like, hey, you don't need to do that stuff to be a great defender. If sit there, stick out in front, drive the hip, lift the hands, that kind of thing, play your angles well, like that'll get the job done.
Yeah, I had a completely identical experience at Penn. Like, I think one of the best things that Coach Murphy ever did was like, he just had zero tolerance for those plays. And like, even just thinking about like going over the head or throwing a wrap check, like I get this sense of like, that's a selfish play, just because Coach Murphy, like, really, it was almost like shameful if you did that. Like, he would harp on it in film and stuff and just say like, this is not what we do. This isn't who we are. And it's really about like establishing that culture that we keep talking about, of having 6 guys playing the right way, and just limiting the good looks by playing fundamental defense. And then on the flip side, like the cool thing that Coach Murphy did was he really celebrated like the under the radar, really selfless plays that would prevent goals. And that was like what we looked at on film and was like, this is an awesome play. So it was like, it was all this, like, you even think about it, like these like nerdy film sessions, but like Coach Murphy's like, look at the way Max Meyer is splitting 2 guys at once, and he's able to hold the passer and make him think about it for like 1 extra second. And it allows Reed Tudor to get back into position and then contest the shot, and the shot goes 6 inches over the goal and just misses or whatever. And that he would like talk about for like 5 minutes. He'd be like, that prevented a goal in the game. And then like, if somebody ever, like, we didn't even really do it, but like if somebody went over the head, he would instead like even if they hit the check, he would highlight how they took themselves out of position, what would have happened if they didn't get it, all those kinds of like negative aspects of it. And it just really like hammered home the fact that like like Matt said, like if you can play this fundamental discipline defense, you can cover anybody. But if you want to be a risk-taking defenseman, you're gonna meet your match one day with somebody that's more athletic than you are, and they're gonna smoke you. So that's kind of why I believe in these like low risk checks and like really just playing percentages, just because I know that I can go up against anybody in the world and like have a shot because this is how I play. But if I was like an over the head rap check guy, like Matt said, like I'd pretty quickly find somebody that's going to smoke me and be able to get to the goal really easily and score. So I think that's like kind of a good mindset to have as a younger player, because your ceiling is unlimited no matter how athletic or lack thereof that you are. If you play that fundamental discipline way, you can cover anybody and play at whatever level you want to.
Yeah. Matt, talk about stick checks, the highlight that just keeps going back. But, I think all of us on the call kind of have, a unique perspective and path that we kind of took kind of growing up. I think for me specifically, when I talk about, going to Rutgers, similar to Matt Dunn, like when I got to Rutgers, I wasn't good enough to like be the ball carrier, like for a lot of reasons. And that put me in a position where I had to be like more off ball, right? And like learn how to be in the flow of an offense, so that when I got older, right, that allowed me to then be like, all right, now I know how to play without the ball in my stick. I don't only need the ball in my stick to be a good player. I know how to help all the other guys in the field. And then, additionally that in a different way, right, we talk about efficiency on defense. Well, at Rutgers, like there was no room for error. Like if I got 5 good shots in a game and I only went 2 for 5, like we're probably going to lose. So I had to discipline myself to be like, when I get those opportunities, I have to go 3 for 5, 4 for 5 for us to be in a position to win. And I think, all of us in the call would kind of refer back to those opportunities that allowed us to develop, and we wouldn't trade those for the world, because that's what's allowing us to be pro players now that kind of can keep this open mind and understand what the discipline and fundamentals can do for us to kind of expand and grow our games. And I think that's such a unique thing with FCL. So, talk a little bit about what that, that means to us as coaches. You guys on the defensive side, I know me and Deemer have touched on that, but how are you then bringing that to, the coaching side of what you guys are doing outside of playing on the field?
So, kind of like we alluded to, I don't forget, all the lessons I was taught from coaches throughout my career. And one of the first, I remember being in high school, and our defensive coach, Tim Sullivan, kind of teaching me the idea of like getting your hips around the goal line extended and like how to think about the field and the angles, and talk to me how to shade the strong-handed players. And that's like it's really important stuff, but it's kind of a very basic knowledge. I understand now that like in high school lacrosse, you just don't have the time to coach guys in such detail as you do in college. And that clicked for me. A lot of things he taught me clicked for me. I changed the way I played because of that. And all of a sudden, like just basically in a week or two, I was playing a different style of defense, not letting guys turn the corner on me and trying to get like a stick check on them, but I was getting my hips around and driving them to the sideline. And then getting to college, learning how to kind of hammer home the stick on front fundamentals, getting really good at planning out of a back pedal and working on goal line angles to a much more, I guess, in detail, much more nuanced, because in college you have those fall ball time, you go through all these little detailed drills and you really hammer home important points. And I sit here now, I'm like, what if I wish I knew that when I was a lot of the stuff when I was younger. There's just not really, there wasn't a resource for me, just like as there isn't for a lot of people. Just whether it's, there's a lot of knowledge in lacrosse, where a lot of it, is at the collegiate level of coaching, and those guys get it to their players when they get to college. But if you can get some of this base, you're not going to grab all of it. But for me, if I can teach players I work with, a couple of the things that really click for me, and help them, some of that stuff is just overnight you can implement into your game and you'll be better. Some of it's stuff you're going to have to spend time working on, but it's nothing crazy. It's stuff that takes effort and discipline to do, that I believe and learn from experience and have seen from experience and talking to guys like Matt and other guys I played with, and just watching the game and working with high school players, that I know works, if you do it. And so that's really, for what that did for me in my career, it makes me really excited to help kind of relay that to players that want to improve their game. Because, when you want to get better, there's nothing more frustrating than not knowing how to. So for somebody that wants to get better, us just being the resource to give them how to get better, especially on the defensive side of the ball, where it might not be as clear on it's not how to improve your shot. It's like, okay, did you know that you're probably putting their stick by your hip, and if you get out in front of you, here's what it's going to do. And by the way, that really bothers offensive players. And it's a simple thing like that that's going to make it this much easier for you to play defense. Things like that really make me excited because I know they can be helpful to players. And for people whose dream it is to play, make their varsity team, go play Division I, maybe play professional one day, it's exciting to give them the tools to kind of take those steps.
Yeah, I think like a lot of the like common like frustrations of defensive players and just like it come from the fact that it's like the appreciation for like a great defensive play takes a lot of understanding of like all the different nuance that goes into it. And so like I'll watch Matt make a play that is like so incredibly difficult, but like to the naked eye, like it's hard to understand what he did so well. And so I think the challenge that Matt and I are excited to take on is like, how do you show like what people are doing so well if it's like really so detailed and so nuanced. And so that's like going to be a big part of like what we're trying to do is like not just telling you like, all right, this is how you should play the ball, or this is how you should have like triangles off wall, or like all these really minute details, but like then translating it to like game film and showing this is why Jesse Bernhardt did this on this play and was able to stop one of the best scorers in the country, and like really tying like concrete examples on film, because offensively it's easy to see a lot of times. And I'm sure you guys will have, an even more detailed perspective and eye on everything. But like you see somebody like rip a shot from outside, or you see somebody like catch and get it off really quickly and they've just got like a beautiful shooting stroke, and you're like, wow, that's an incredible shot. Like I want to be like that guy. I'm going to mirror exactly what he does. But on the defensive side, it's so much more like subtleties and just like how you're aligning your feet, and like, does this guy have his stick in front of his stomach, or is it kind of at his side? Like all of these little details end up making the difference, like Matt said, where a good defensive play and a bad defensive play might be the difference between like 3 inches on the shot going wide or going right into the corner. So like the challenge is really to like explain all these subtleties and like be able to like demonstrate them on film and stuff. And so I think that Matt and I have kind of laid out what we think is good defense at a personal and unit level. And now I think the next project is really going to be like tying that to examples on film that really kind of exploit those situations and kind of skills and techniques.
Yeah, I think you guys, and what I've loved about, getting to watch each of you guys coach, little biased, but also not biased, is, how much you guys dig into those subtleties. And, I think, all of us could think about footwork, right? And doing 4-cone drills and doing ladders and jump rope. And, that's going to really speak to athleticism. But, even, I know Jules and I, and, when Matt Dunn and I did a webinar this spring and we were talking about the defensive perspective versus the offense, you start to learn so much about these little things. And that's where I think the film, and watching the games and learning these subtleties is going to be so important for these younger players. And I think you guys have a really exciting opportunity to keep, taking, what you've learned in your careers and from that really, unique defensive perspective and, get to, pass that on. And, can you guys, as we wrap up here, what are 2 or 3 simple things that, new coaches to the game or, coaches in general and some players, should be looking for, defensively in this next week that goes beyond just maybe some on-ball technique? What are some things that we can focus on? We have 3 great games, on, the Premier Lacrosse League tomorrow. What are some things that people can tune into and try and notice?
Yeah, I would say, I would say notice look at each possession critically. Notice when a guy you think is talented has the ball. Notice how the team's playing them. Notice how they're positioned on the ball and what the rest of the defense does. Are they are they shifting over, getting ready to slide, and what's going on behind the ball. So I would say to challenge younger players watching to see not only a lot of times you watch the ball, try to watch the rest of the defense for a couple of these. See where the off-ball help's coming from. See if there's a second slide, a backside fill. Are they filling from the top? Challenge yourself to see, think about if you were in that position, what would you be doing? So I think one thing I like to do is always watch off the ball and see what other teams are doing beyond just covering it. I think then you can say if they scored or if they didn't score, you could talk to yourself, hey, what did they do well there? What didn't they do well? That guy was ball watching, he got backdoor cut, or that guy wasn't looking at the ball at all. He's face guarding his man and didn't see his opportunity to slide. So one thing defensively I would say is challenge yourself to look at a little more just kind of off the ball and see how teams are playing it, because there's so many offensive weapons on the field out here that you'll see that for different teams, when you play against different offenses, different teams defend it differently. And I would challenge yourselves to think critically on that. Otherwise, I would try to notice, just like if you have the game on TV, turn the volume up, listen for these guys communicating. I think that's something that's really cool, and that can be implemented at any level. Something cool that PLL has done is have these mic'd up instances you can hear on the field. Listen to what guys say when picks happen. Listen to what guys say when they're hot. Listen to the communication and chatter out there. And notice if it's quiet, how does the play look? Versus if it's really loud, how does the play look? And I think you'll find that a lot of times the louder defenses, the more cohesive they tend to be. So I would challenge yourself to look at how people play beyond just the ball, how teams are moving as units out there. I think it's really interesting to kind of look at that and see how, what things you can take away from what teams are doing off the ball.
Yeah, I think Matt nailed it. Those were kind of my 2 points, were just kind of like look away from the ball and just try to understand like what goes into, again, to Matt's original point, like you play defense so often not on the ball. And so often we talk about like, oh, this person, covered this person, held them to this. It's like defense is way more about like how you are contributing to your defensive unit, not just what you're doing on the ball. So understand, like picking out certain guys that you like and watching them throughout an entire possession can be really helpful. And then, like Matt said, with those mic'd ups, it's really interesting because you get like a front row view into like what being a really good communicator is all about. And it's funny. It's like thinking back to like middle school and high school, like it was all about being like loud and always saying something. But I think when you watch these PLL games, like the best communicators are the guys that are very direct with what they're saying, and they're saying it to somebody. So it's not like they're just some crazy person just yelling throughout the entire possession, but it's usually like a controlled voice, and they're offering more and more information. So it's like, if I'm playing with Dunn, I'm like, Dunn, you've got to pick right. You got to pick right. We're going to switch it. Watch the slip. Like it's those second and third layers of communication that really separate like good defensemen from great defensemen. And I always think it's cool on these mic'd ups. You get to see what level of communication is going on at the highest competition. And I think that there's a lot to take away from that, because talking is not that difficult to do. It just kind of takes discipline, like we talked about, to just remind yourself to keep talking. So something that you can implement at the high school, middle school, college level, and immediately kind of raise your game to be one of the best at your position.
Absolutely, guys. And look, we know you're on the bubble right now, and you got, games tomorrow. We really appreciate, you guys taking all that time to share, for our listeners. We're wishing you guys the best. We're pulling for you. Awesome job so far in pool play. Looking forward to seeing, both of you guys continue on in the championship series. Best of luck. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys next episode.
Sure.
Thanks, fellas.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Nice job. Thanks, fellas.
Later, fellas.
All right. Cool. Thank you, guys.
See you guys.
Boys.